So we're going to start out in Genesis 14. This is verse 10 through 24. Now in the valley of Siddim was full of tar pits, and when the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some of the men fell into them, and the rest fled to the hills. The 4 kings seized all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food, and then they went away. They also carried off Abram's nephew Lot and his possessions, since he was living in Sodom. A man who had escaped came and reported this to Abram the Hebrew. And now Abram was living near the great trees of Mamre the Amorite, a brother of Eshcol and Aner, all of whom were allied with Abram. When Abram heard that his relative had been taken captive, he called out the 318 men born in his household and went in pursuit as far as Dan. During the night, Abram divided his men to attack, and he routed them, pursuing them as far as Habo, north of Damascus. He recovered all the goods and brought back his relative Lot and his possessions, together with the women and the other people. After Abram returned from defeating Kedorlaomer and the kings allied with him, the king of Sodom came out to meet him in the valley of Sheva, that is, the king's valley. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of the God Most High, and he blessed Abram, saying, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth. And praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Then Abram gave 1/10 of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, "Give me the people and keep the goods for yourself." But Abram said to the king of Sodom, "With raised hand I have sworn an oath to the Lord, God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, that I will accept nothing belonging to you, not even a thread or the strap of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say, 'I made Abram rich.' I will accept nothing but what my men have eaten and share that belongs to the men who went with me, to Aner, Eshcol, and Mamre. Let them have their share." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. Things are falling out of my Bible. Well, there is a Pixar movie that I'm sure many of you have seen called Ratatouille. And at the center of this story is Remy, a rat, specifically a kitchen rat. The one creature that everyone agrees does not belong anywhere near food. And yet, Remy has an impossible dream. He wants to be a chef. And after getting separated from his family, Remy ends up in Paris, right inside the restaurant of Chef Gusteau, his hero. And there he meets Linguini, a clumsy janitor with no talent for cooking at all. Together, they form the most unlikely partnership imaginable: a rat hidden under a chef's hat, guiding a man who had no idea what he was doing. And against all odds, the food they made was actually incredible. The restaurant begins to thrive again, but looming over everything is Anton Ego, the harshest food critic in Paris. One bad review from him could destroy the restaurant completely, and when Ego arrives, everyone can see it coming. It's all about to come crumbling down. But instead, something unexpected happens. Remy doesn't cook something flashy or impressive. He makes a simple, humble dish, ratatouille. And when Ego takes a bite, he's instantly transported back to his childhood, and the critic who built his reputation on tearing others down is undone by a meal made by the most unlikely chef imaginable. And in the end, the truth comes out. There were rats in the kitchen. The restaurant closes, And by all human standards, it looks like a failure. But that's not how the story ends. Ego funds a new restaurant where Remy can cook openly, and Remy proves that greatness can come from anywhere, even from someone the world had completely dismissed. It's a story that is unlikely of victory. Not power or overcoming power, not the strong defeating the strong, but the unexpected triumphing because the outcome was never dependent on appearances, statuses, or human ability. And that idea that victory can come from the least likely source isn't just a Pixar message. Because when we turn into Genesis 14 and we see God do the same thing, give victory to someone who isn't likely to win through means that shouldn't work so that no one can mistake where the power is truly from. Chapter 14 begins with the story of rivalries, battle, and rebellion between some ancient Mesopotamian kings. In this time, most cities had their own kings, and wars and rivalries and alliances among kings were very common because they were always looking for ways to conquer nearby cities and therefore increase their power and their wealth. And when a king managed to conquer a city, they then had to pay an annual tribute to the victorious king, kind of like a once-a-year tax. And the old kings of the conquered cities were now required to follow and enforce all the laws and commands of the new conquering king. And in Abram's day, there was a king named Chedorlaomer who was especially powerful. Under his rule were 5 occupied cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah, and he was allied with 3 other powerful kings. And after 12 years of oppression and yearly tributes, the kings of the 5 conquered cities decided that they had had enough of, how many times do I have to preach and a fly hits me in the face? That's the 3rd time it's happened. It's fine. The kings of the 5 conquered cities decided that they had had enough of Chedorlaomer and it was time for a new era. They were ready to rebel, attack Chedorlaomer and his allies, and take back the rule of their own cities once and for all. But when they set out to attack, unfortunately, they don't get very far. The kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled the scene almost immediately, and everyone else retreated behind them. And with Sodom and Gomorrah wide open, Chedorlaomer and his allies invaded the cities and seized all the goods, the food, the money, the idols, the livestock, anything that was valuable, and carried it off to take it home with them. And normally, this sort of thing wouldn't really cause any sort of concern for Abram. It was a normal thing that happened all the time. But what caught Abram's attention was when a man who escaped the battle came to tell Abram that his nephew Lot, who had been living in Sodom, had been captured and carried away by Chedorlaomer. And now Abram didn't owe anything to his nephew Lot. And when Abram and Lot had to go their separate ways because their households had gotten too big, Lot chose to go towards the east, the wicked and sinful cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. And he chose to live apart from Abram and God in a land that looked really good and plentiful, but was full of sin and evil. And now that choice had backfired on Lot, and instead of the freedom he thought he'd have, he was being held hostage by a power-hungry king. And since Abram wasn't responsible for Lot or his choices anymore. He could have easily shrugged his shoulders and said, "I told you so. You get what you get, Lot." Or he could have ignored it altogether. It's not his problem anymore. But instead, Abram immediately calls his most reliable men and leads the charge to go rescue his nephew. Abram put the needs of his sinful, immature nephew above everything else. Lot didn't really deserve to be rescued. He had gotten himself into this mess. But Abram chose to honor God in his response and be an extension and a testimony of God's grace and love to his nephew. Lot may have been lost, but he would never be too far gone for God to find him and bring him home again. And that's exactly what Abram does. He led his 318 men over 240 miles by foot before attacking in the middle of the night and defeating Chedorlaomer and his allies. They then retrieved Lot and his family, as well as all the stolen goods and captured people from Sodom and Gomorrah, and returned home victorious. But this was no ordinary battle. It was a miracle that Abram had won it with only 318 men. He was up against the armies of 4 cities, which would have been thousands of men with much more experience. And even by attacking in the middle of the night when they're most vulnerable, Abram's men still shouldn't have stood a chance against these armies. The only explanation for such a victory was that God made it happen. And God was fulfilling the promise that he made to Abram when he first spoke to him, that he would bless whoever blessed Abram and curse whoever cursed him. God wasn't letting anyone mess with Abram, and God would defend him and give him victory over every enemy. And God promises the same thing to us, that he will protect and give victory to those who honor and trust him. When Melchizedek the priest comes to celebrate this victory and bless Abram, he says, "Praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." If God can give Abram victory and deliver thousands of his enemies into his hand, then God can go out and take the big things that you're worried about, the problems that have a hold on you, the weaknesses that you can't overcome, and the enemies that are knocking at your door, and deliver each and every one of them into your hand. He can take your fears, your anxieties, your addictions, your pain, your shame, and whatever keeps you up at night. And he can disarm them, paralyze them, wad them up like a little piece of paper, and place them motionless into the palm of your hand. He is that powerful. You don't have to be afraid of your enemies or ashamed of your weaknesses, because Jesus has already declared victory over them. And we know that when we are weak, that he is strong. And when we don't measure up, where we can't get it right, it is prime opportunity for God's power to show up and reveal to us just exactly what he is capable of. Our weaknesses are nothing to be embarrassed about, because those are exactly where God comes to meet us. Abram's army was weak, and yet God made a way. And when we are in Christ, He will always make a way because he is a God of victory. We can live knowing that in the end, we will have victory and outlive and outlast all evil because of Christ's victory on the cross and resurrection from the grave. There is nothing in your life that he can't win the battle against, nothing that he can't deliver into the palm of your hand. He is a God of victory who wants to make his children victorious. And when we trust and honor God in all that we do and with all that we have, we will win the battle each and every time because he will be there with us. Recognize when God is there with you. And when Abram returned home from battle, 2 kings came to meet him, the king of Sodom and Melchizedek, the king of Salem. Melchizedek was both the king of a city and also a priest of God, something that was rare in Abram's time. And when he heard about Abram's miraculous victory, he traveled to meet him. And it's clear by his greeting to Abram that he knew the real reason why Abram was victorious. He knew that it was God and not Abram's talents or skills or abilities that won the battle. And so Melchizedek comes to pay honor to God and give Abram a blessing. And when Melchizedek arrives, he treats Abram like royalty and lays out a beautiful banquet of bread and wine for him. And after a long and exhausting journey through the desert, Melchizedek knew that this battle had to have taken a lot out of Abram. And I'm sure this bread and wine was very much appreciated. It provided a moment to pause and relax and really celebrate this victory with a meal. And once they feasted, Melchizedek then blessed Abram and said, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, creator of heaven and earth, and praise be to God Most High, who delivered your enemies into your hand." Melchizedek knew as well as Abram whose victory this was. And he knew that God had blessed Abram and gone before him to go win this battle, and that God deserved the honor and the praise for this victory. And so as a fellow follower of God, Melchizedek blessed Abram and witnessed to God's amazing provision and power. And in response to this blessing that Melchizedek gives Abram gave Melchizedek 1/10 of all the goods that he had seized in the battle. And upon giving this gift, Abram was giving to the Lord and recognizing his hand in this victory. And Abram was all about pointing to God in victory. There was no way that he was going to take credit for what God had done. And like Abram, we need to recognize when God has done something good in our lives. If the Lord has done something good for you, tell people about it. If you've been praying for something for a long time and God finally shows up and makes a way, tell someone about it. If he has healed you when you thought that there was no hope and no healing to be had, tell someone about it. When he frees you from something that has held you captive, tell people about it. Don't ignore what he's done. Don't minimize it or take credit for it. Tell everyone what the Lord has done for you. Because not only does God just deserve the glory and praise that we give him, I guarantee you the people around you need to hear this good news. Hearing about the ways that God is working in the lives of others gives people so much hope, even to unbelievers. Sharing how God is working and doing the impossible in your life is evidence to others that if God can do it for them, maybe he can do it for me. And there is a spark of hope. Your recognition of God's grace will plant seeds and just might save a soul. Recognize when God has done something good for you and tell people about it. Once Abraham gave his offering to Melchizedek, he turns his attention to the king of Sodom, whose welcome was lacking. He who had the most to be thankful for. Abraham had just gotten all of his stuff back after all, offered no word of thanks, not even a hello. He gruffly demanded the return of his people and told Abram to keep the goods. As was customary at that time, Abram had every right to keep the goods that he seized in this battle. Stuff was finders keepers back then. And while everyone else may have taken the king up on this deal, we see Abram do something different and culturally totally unheard of. Abram raises his hand in an oath to God and denies the goods. He says, I will never accept anything belonging to you, not even a thread or the tie of a sandal, so that you will never be able to say that I made Abram rich. Abram was so disgusted with the evil and wickedness of Sodom that he wanted absolutely nothing to do with them. He didn't even want to keep their goods for himself to pad his own wallet. Instead, Abram was fully committed to depending on God for his every need. He didn't want anyone to be able to look back on his life and give credit to what anyone had done besides God. He didn't want to give anyone else the credit for what he had gotten done in his life besides the Lord. But trust me, it would have been tempting for Abram to take these goods. Even for a wealthy man like Abram, the combined wealth of a whole city would have really improved his life. But at what cost? Depending on the enemy to provide instead of God. There are plenty of opportunities for us to take a shortcut or take the easy way out instead of depending on God and depend on all the wrong things to provide what God really wants to provide for us. Some people turn to gambling when they need money. Some go to psychics or tarot card readers when they want answers. Some turn to food for comfort or sex for validation, and none of it ever lasts. Money gets spent. There are always more questions. Food only lasts for a moment, and validation without true intimacy is superficial. The worldly solutions that we find are always temporary and often come with strings attached. They may look easy and convenient, but they never really are. They may work for a while, but not forever. That's why it's so important that we choose to trust in God's provision and not the enemy's. The grace of God is sufficient and everlasting and worth infinitely more than the things offered to you by the world or by the enemy. The peace that passes all understanding, God's love, his wisdom, his comfort, all of these things we can't find in the things of this world. It is only through trusting and seeking him. In the face of all your needs today, physical, financial, emotional, relational, who better to trust than the God Most High, who parted the Red Sea, turned water into wine, multiplied loaves and fishes, delivered Abram's enemies into the palm of his hands, and raised a dead man to life. Isn't he capable of supplying your every need? We serve a God who is more attentive to and invested in us than we will ever know. Trust that if you put your faith and trust in him, that he will conquer whatever giant is in front of you. He will go before you to give you victory, and he will give you whatever you need and deliver each of them into your hand. Trust in the Lord, and like Abram, he will give you victory. Amen. Would you pray with me?